All right, so let's dive into Mockito.
Okay.
And specifically, something that could really help us level up our Java testing game.
Right.
We're building this critical piece of software.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a financial app
Mhm.
or an e-commerce platform, and we're using Mockito to create these really robust unit tests.
Right.
But how do we make sure that when we're mocking those really complex interactions,
Yeah.
we're not just verifying that a method was called,
Okay.
but that it actually received the correct data,
Yeah.
especially when it's like buried deep
Yeah.
within nested objects?
That's a really great point. And it's definitely something that I think a lot of developers grapple with.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Mhm.
if you're building a house, you wouldn't just check that the walls are up.
Right.
You'd also want to make sure that like the wiring
Oh, yeah.
and the plumbing inside those walls are correctly connected.
Okay.
And in our code, that wiring and plumbing is really the data that's flowing between objects.
Yeah.
And Mockito's ArgumentCaptor is the tool that lets us examine those connections
Okay.
with like real precision.
I like that analogy.
Yeah,
So it's not enough to just know that the mailman delivered something.
exactly.
We need to open the package
Right.
and verify that the contents are actually what we ordered.
Exactly. So imagine you have like an audit service
Right.
that meticulously logs details of every transaction within your system.
Okay.
You wouldn't just want to confirm that the audit service's log transaction method was called.
Right.
You'd want to dig deeper
Yeah.
and ensure that the transaction ID, the user role,
Okay.
all those nested details are logged correctly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's get practical here. How do we actually use this argument capture in our tests?
Let's break it down step by step.
Sure.
So imagine you have this mock object.
Yeah.
Let's just call it mock audit service.
Okay.
And it has that log transaction method that we just talked about, which takes a transaction object as an argument.
Right.
Now, let's say you want to verify that deep inside this transaction object,
Okay.
a field called details.authorizationCode was set to a specific value,
Yeah.
like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. So that sounds like a pretty specific scenario.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see how this type of check would be really crucial in like a real world application.
Absolutely. And ArgumentCaptor gives us the power to do this with ease.
Okay, cool.
So the first thing you need to do is create an instance of ArgumentCaptor specifically tailored to capture objects of type transaction.
Okay.
You do this using ArgumentCaptor.forClass,
Transaction.class.
So we're essentially saying, hey, Mockito,
Yep.
keep an eye out for any transaction objects that get passed to this method.
Exactly. Now comes the crucial part, capturing the argument.
Okay.
We do this by using the .capture method within the verify statement from Mockito.
All right.
It's like setting a trap to snag that transaction object as it goes into the log transaction method.
Right.
So the verify statement is how we tell Mockito we expect this method to have been called,
Mm-hmm.
and the .capture is like saying grab that transaction object as it passes through.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm getting this.
You got it. And it would look something like this.
Right.
Verify mockauditservice.aug transactionCaptor.capture.
Hey.
You'll notice that we're using transactionCaptor.capture as the argument
Right.
in our verify statement.
Gotcha.
And this tells Mockito to intercept the actual transaction object passed to the method and store it in our transaction captor.
Okay, so we've set the trap,
Right.
and the transaction object is caught.
Yep.
What do we do next?
This is where we get to analyze the captured specimen.
Okay.
You can retrieve the captured transaction object using transactionCaptor.getValue.
Right.
It's like opening the trap and examining our prize.
Okay.
So now we have this captured transaction object, which is a real transaction instance that was passed to the method during the test.
Perfect. So now we have this captured transaction object.
Right.
How do we actually check those nested fields, like the details.authorization code?
So this is where like good coding practices come into play.
Yeah, okay.
Instead of directly accessing the fields, we actually use getter methods to access the values within the captured transaction object.
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be get details
Okay.
and then get authorization code.
Right.
It's not just about good manners, but also about ensuring that our tests actually respect the design principles of the code,
Right.
like encapsulation.
I see. So it's like we're asking politely instead of barging in and grabbing what we want.
Exactly. And so To check the authorization code, we would write something like assert equals 12345 captured transaction.getDetails. This asserts that the authorization code within the captured transaction's details is indeed 12345, just like we expected.
This is making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see just how powerful ArgumentCaptor can be for writing truly robust tests.
Yeah.
But what if one of those fields we're trying to access, like the details field, in this case is null? We don't want our test crashing with a null pointer exception, right?
That's an excellent point, and it's actually a very common pitfall.
Okay.
So robust tests should handle nulls gracefully.
Okay.
Before accessing those potentially null fields, you should always add assertions like assert not null, captured transaction.getDetails.
Yeah.
This acts as a safety net, ensuring that our test fails informatively if we encounter any unexpected null values.
All right. I like that.
It's like wearing a helmet or rock climbing, just in case.
Always better to be safe than sorry, especially when we're dealing with these nested objects and potentially null values.
Exactly.
So we've covered the basics of setting up an argument captor, capturing an argument, and then accessing those nested fields safely.
Right.
What are some of the best practices we should keep in mind when using ArgumentCaptor in our tests?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some common traps that we can avoid.
You're absolutely right. Like any powerful tool, ArgumentCaptor is most effective when used wisely.
Okay.
One common mistake is overusing it.
Okay.
Sometimes a simple assert equals matcher will do the job just fine.
Right.
Especially if you're only checking the top-level values of an argument.
Right.
Don't reach for the most complex tool when a simpler one will suffice.
Yeah.
It's like using a chainsaw to cut a piece of paper.
Yeah, overkill.
Exactly.
So choose the right tool for the job.
Yes.
Any other tips for using ArgumentCaptor effectively?
Yeah.
I'm thinking especially about keeping our tests clean and readable.
Another crucial aspect is giving your ArgumentCaptor variables meaningful names.
Okay.
So instead of something generic like ArgCaptor, use a name that clearly indicates what type of object it's capturing, like TransactionCaptor or OrderDetailsCaptor.
Okay.
This makes your tests much easier to understand, especially when you come back to them months later.
It's a great point. I've definitely been guilty of using generic names in the past, and it can make debugging a real headache.
It can.
Clear naming conventions are key for any code, but especially for tests.
Exactly.
It's like labeling your tools properly.
Yeah.
You'll always know where to find the right one.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of good practices, let's not forget those null checks we talked about earlier.
Right.
They might seem like a small thing,
Yeah.
but they can really save you a lot of trouble down the road by preventing those pesky null pointer exceptions.
Absolutely.
It's like having a safety net under a tightrope walker.
Right.
It might not always be needed, but it's certainly nice to have it there.
So ArgumentCaptor is like that safety net, helping us write more robust and reliable tests. But what about real-world challenges?
Yeah.
Let's say you're working with legacy code that doesn't have those nice clean getter methods.
Right.
For all those nested fields, what do you do then?
That's a common scenario, especially when dealing with legacy code bases. While there are workarounds, like using reflection to directly access fields, I generally advise against it. It breaks encapsulation, and it can lead to fragile tests that break easily if the internal structure of the class changes.
So what's the better approach in those situations?
Ideally, you'd want to refactor the code and introduce those missing getter methods. This not only makes testing easier, but also improves the overall design and maintainability of the code. It might require some effort up front, but it pays off in the long run. It's like renovating an old house. You might uncover some hidden problems, but in the end, you'll have a more solid and livable structure.
That makes sense. Refactoring can be a daunting task.
It can.
But it's often the best way to improve the quality and testability of legacy code.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the benefits of ArgumentCaptor. But are there any potential downsides? What about performance, for example?
That's a great question.
The
performance impact of using ArgumentCaptor is usually negligible, especially if you're only capturing a few arguments. However, if you're capturing arguments within a loop that runs thousands of times, it could potentially slow down your tests.
I see.
It's like checking the contents of every single package that comes through a busy sorting facility. It might slow things down a bit.
So moderation is key.
Yeah.
Like with many things in programming.
It is.
Use ArgumentCaptor strategically where it provides the most value.
Right.
And be mindful of potential performance bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other caveats to keep in mind?
One thing to remember is that ArgumentCaptor only captures the argument at the time the method is called.
Okay.
If the argument is modified later within the method, those changes won't be reflected in the captured object. It's like taking a snapshot.
Okay.
You capture the state at that specific moment, but any subsequent changes won't be recorded.
Okay, that's an important detail to remember.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure we're capturing the argument at the right point in the method's execution.
Yes.
To get the data we're interested in.
Exactly.
Anything else that might trip up developers who are new to ArgumentCaptor?
One final point I'd like to emphasize is the importance of understanding the context of your tests.
Okay.
ArgumentCaptor is a powerful tool for verifying specific details of method interactions.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be the only tool in your testing arsenal.
Right.
Sometimes it's more beneficial to focus on testing the overall behavior of your system rather than getting bogged down in granular details of individual method calls.
That's a great reminder to keep the bigger picture in mind.
Yeah.
Don't lose sight of the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Sometimes a higher level integration test can provide more valuable insights than a series of hyper-focused unit tests. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from like the basic mechanics of ArgumentCaptor to best practices and even like some real-world challenges.
Yeah.
I feel like we've really gone from zero to hero in our understanding of this powerful testing tool.
I'd say we've equipped ourselves with the knowledge to really wield ArgumentCaptor effectively.
Right.
In our quest for writing really robust and reliable Java code.
Exactly. But before we wrap up, I'd love to get your thoughts on the broader impact
of
tools like ArgumentCaptor on the software development landscape.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about how they can help us catch bugs and improve code design. But what about the bigger picture?
That's a fascinating question. I think tools like ArgumentCaptor are part of a larger trend towards more sophisticated and automated testing practices.
Yeah.
As software systems become increasingly complex, it's just not feasible to rely solely on manual testing anymore.
Right.
We need tools that can help us automate the process of verifying our code's behavior, especially those like intricate interactions deep within our applications.
So it's not just about testing more, it's about testing smarter.
Absolutely. Tools like ArgumentCaptor empower us to write tests that are not only comprehensive, but also incredibly precise. We can verify not just that a method was called, but that it received the exact data we expected, even when that data is nested multiple levels deep.
Yeah.
This level of precision is just essential for building reliable software, especially in critical domains like finance or healthcare, where even a small error can have significant consequences.
It's like having a microscopic lens
that
lets us examine those really fine details of our code's behavior.
Precisely. And the more we can automate these checks, the more confident we can be that our code is functioning correctly.
Right.
And this frees up developers to focus on those higher level tasks, like designing elegant solutions and delivering value to users.
I'm also curious about how ArgumentCaptor and other testing tools influence collaboration. Within development teams.
Yeah.
It seems like having clear, precise tests that verify these intricate interactions would make it easier for developers to understand each other's code.
Absolutely.
And make changes with more confidence.
That's an excellent point. Well-written tests.
Yeah.
Especially those that utilize ArgumentCaptor effectively, can act as a form of living documentation. They clearly communicate the expected behavior of the code and provide concrete examples of how the code should be used. This shared understanding fosters better collaboration, reduces misunderstandings, and ultimately leads to a more cohesive and maintainable code base.
So it's like having a common language that everyone on the team can speak and understand.
Exactly. And this shared understanding becomes even more crucial when new developers join the team. Instead of having to decipher cryptic code comments or rely solely on word-of-mouth explanations, they can actually dive into the tests and immediately see how different components are supposed to interact. It's a much faster and more effective way to onboard new team members.
So ArgumentCaptor is not just about catching bugs. It's about building better software, fostering collaboration, and creating a more efficient and enjoyable development process.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really powerful message for any developer, regardless of their experience level.
I couldn't agree more. By mastering techniques like ArgumentCaptor and embracing the mindset of thorough and precise testing, developers can significantly elevate their craft and contribute to creating software that is robust, reliable, and maintainable.
Well said. And to all our listeners out there, we hope you've gained some valuable insights into the power of Mockito's ArgumentCaptor. Remember, don't just test the surface, dive deep. Verify those nested arguments, and build software that you can be truly proud of.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep coding, keep testing, and keep exploring the depths of software craftsmanship.